So this is Community Meta podcast for Game On Aus. I'm Mighty and that's Morg. And we are talking about video games and kind of where they intersect with community, the sort of the human element. Gosh, they're so unpredictable, am I right? So,
Oh, sorry. Did you want me to go there?
admittedly, me just saying so and stopping
Yeah.
doesn't really,
Can
it doesn't lead on very well.
can we do a
All right.
retake?
No, it's fine. We're doing it. We'll do it
Doing it live.
Wink, wink. Manufacturing authenticity for fun and profit. Okay. So today we'll be having a bit of a chat about differences that you can get with games that have got more of a PvE focus versus games that have got a PvP focus. So I think we might. How about we start off? We'll have a bit of a chat about just a couple of communities that we fit into from either of those. So, Morg, what sort of PvP communities have you been part of that stick in your mind?
Honestly, there's so many communities
Yeah.
that have PvP, from Counter-Strike to Apex to the Hell Let Loose squad, Insurgency. There's honestly so many to pick from that they all give a sort of different feel.
Yeah. Do
Obviously,
you have one that's your favorite, or is it more like just
I would
that
I would
whole
say
PvP in
ge-
general is
if we
is
go
the
genre wise, it would be the realistic shooters
Yep.
because you're not just stuck with the same squad. You can sort of talk to other squads as they're going about doing their things.
Yeah, you can
And
kind
then
of like meet new people randomly on the
yeah,
battlefield
exactly.
as
And
it is. Yeah.
you both just happen to land on behind some cover, and then you just start chatting because
Yeah.
if you move, you're just gonna lose your head. And you get those beautiful moments where people really get into the game and they start
Mm.
screaming medic
Yeah.
as explosives go around.
Yeah.
Um, the-
Yeah, like the light
if
role play.
yeah. So if I had to pick between like a PvE and a PvP community, I'd go down that route of PvP community for the realistic shooters.
Hmm.
Um, if we flip to the PvE side, then the all-time classic Minecraft comes to mind of just
Yep.
hopping on a server, no PvP, just sort of there to have a good time, chill, and build with some other players.
Yeah. And those are good for that, aren't they?
Yeah, 100%.
So,
Do you wanna
oh yes,
do you
sorry.
wanna go? Do
Oh,
you
I'll
wanna
go. I'll have
talk
a go.
about your
I'll have a go at using
you have
words.
yeah.
Right. So I've belonged to. I'm a little bit more on the PvP side of things as well. I did kind of get my start playing a lot of like PvE stuff. I used to like long time ago. I used to play a lot of like StarCraft just against the AI over and over again and get wrecked by it. But these days I do trend a lot more towards PvP. Planet side is my jam. It's basically like you say with the realistic shooters, it's that large scale. You do kind of meet people randomly, and can sort of have, you can still have like a gameplay, but you can also, due to the scale and the teamwork requirements, you do actually have to connect with other people to kind of get anything done. You know, like you can still be really really good and be a force, like, you know, a force multiplier in and of yourself. But eventually, you know, like you can't 1v10, no matter how hard you try. Um, and there's a very special one for me, in a different genre actually for RTS, was Dawn of War, and I'm not gonna lie, it was Dawn of War Soulstorm, which is like the least good of the Dawn of Wars. But what was special about that was I had a couple of mates that we played it with regularly, and it was the first time I'd had a couple of friends that I could play a competitive game against. And after it was over, win or lose, we were still friends, if that made sense. Like we weren't like that
That's a rare
invested with it.
occurrence.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was sort of, obviously, you know, and the great thing about that was that we also evolved our own personal meta amongst us. And to be fair, one of the guys just played the overpowered Dark Eldar all the time. So what happened was almost always play free for all, and eventually it was just me and the other guy gang up on him, get him out the way, and then we'd finish the match. But that sort of that was a really good experience for me, because it did sort of teach me that you can have a PvP and like a competitive thing, and it doesn't necessarily destroy relationships, if that makes sense. Because a lot of the time beforehand, I was sort of caught in the middle. I was like, because I do tend to deep dive at the games that I'll play. It was quite often that I'd be like that guy in your friend group who's like
Obsessed.
gone, yeah, so many more hours in the game and all this sort of stuff. And so like I was constantly sort of plagued, like, okay, well, if we play something competitive, what if I win? Okay, well then I feel good for winning, but then my friends have lost, and then like if I completely stomp them, maybe they won't want to play with me anymore. So you have to try and tease it out. But on the other side, because I'm really into trying to push myself to be better and stuff like that, if I do that and then I'm going, oh, I lose, I suck, it's not fun. And so like but having that one where the other guys weren't so stressed about winning or losing and just enjoyed playing the game, it was really important for me, because then that way I could kind of learn that it is possible to be like that, if that makes sense, where like everyone's just trying new things and having a red hot crack, and you get your own little personal meta, and it's cool. I like it, sort of thing, as opposed to sort of like, oh man, you don't want to play Risk with Aunt Muriel, she gets real punchy, like
Yeah. I mean, you sort of get
uh,
that interesting part when you play with friends where you one of them will go, "Hey, I'm totally not going to do this thing. You can trust me. We can work together." And then you fall into the trap, and they just blindside you.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the social deception stuff. Like
Yeah.
I'm no good at that sort of stuff, like the like Among Us and those sort of games either. Like I'm woeful at them, man. I just want to sit and do the little button tasks, and that's it. um, so I think that in terms of like from a community side of things, I think learning that those different mentalities were actually out there, and it wasn't always going to be like you have to co-op with your friends, um even if sort of eventually you all get so good that it's boring. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
um yeah
There's a
you go.
there's if you holistically looking at this topic, you sort of think PvE versus PvP. Like, how in depth can it go? But then you start to
Mm,
think, oh, when we say PvE, we sort of think, if I use City Skylines for an example, you're if you're really into City Skylines, you'll be trying to find ways to sort of improve your city, and then you're going to go to a place like Reddit, and join the community there. And sort of whilst it's
that's
still
a
a
bold strategy.
it's a whilst it's a single player game, you're still getting involved with a community on how people are doing different strategies at sort of improving their city. How have they done a junction or a roundabout, which is really effective for them, and how you can implement that in your game. Um, or you're just posting City Skylines memes and and shit posting there. But all the same, you're still getting involved in a PvE community without the actual multiplayer aspect.
Yeah. And I think I do believe that sort of there is an inherent difference in PvE and PvP sort of discussions amongst the player base. And, like PvP communities, they tear each other apart, man. Like, if there's any kind of other faction, like people are button heads against each other. It's like the whole class war thing, right? Like the devs are up here and the player base is down here and getting away with it. But PVE ones, they tend to be a bit more relaxed, more memes, more sort of chill. And if PVE communities do tend to get on the balance train, sometimes, like the Warframe community for a while was very much like the community wouldn't really call for nerfs as such, unless something was so strong that it was completely invalidating gameplay, sort of thing. Like a long time ago, the Warframe Trinity, their ability was so strong that you pretty much had immortal teams. just running through levels. So they eventually they did nerf that. Um, there's a
Was it
long
even a game at that point?
exactly. Like it's the whole thing. Like, what's the point of playing if you know what the outcome's going to be, right? Oh, I'm just going to win anyway. Like, you better hope that you better hope that you can get enough dopamine just solely out of a game, being like, congratulations, you did the thing, even if it
Winner.
wasn't like a challenge. Um, so that's one, and I think a special mention I have to say is the Devil May Cry community. Like after Devil May Cry 5 came out, it just exploded, and it's so good. Like it's just memes. People are doing like combo videos where they're like showing off like really intricate combos that they've done. Because for anyone who's not familiar, Devil May Cry is like Dark Souls on all of the amphetamines, basically. Um, and so it's wild. Uh, but the story is like it's like it's pretty. It's not too bad actually. Like it's heavily influenced by the Divine Comedies. But the general gameplay of it is just they just crank it up to 11 and they have fun with it, if that makes sense. Like it's a game that kind of is aware that it's a game, so they have a little bit of fun with it. They don't take themselves too seriously, and the community doesn't take themselves too seriously as a result. And they also get into like lore discussions and all this sort of things like that. But yeah, it was really like when Devil May Cry 5 came out, like that one was more or less like a love letter to the community in game form, and it was really really cool. Meanwhile, you have PvP communities who are sort of like just ready to fight everybody.
It's like with Foxhole, which is it's a World War One, World War Two, sort of like hybrid sort of looking, maybe World War One, but you sort
Mm,
of you pick your faction you want to represent,
mm,
and then you sort of just you stick with that, and you join the war effort under that, and that goes on for literal days, and you get that
mm.
invested into that faction that the next Soviet once that war ends, just stay um
Yeah,
with the faction, and you just hate each other
yeah.
immensely.
I'll have to. There was a study for a psychological effect that says like putting people into arbitrary like teams or boxes like that genuinely affects how they treat each other. Even if it is completely arbitrary, it's like red team, blue team. Like if people start identifying, oh, I'm red team, but that blue team, like even though there is
The
no
worst.
difference between the makeups of those two particular teams, aside from whatever you cook up to justify your choice, um, like it does affect how people discuss each other. I'll have to look that up at some point because that's
Yeah,
there was studies into that. It's really interesting.
it's really interesting when you sort of you put people together for a common goal, which I guess this is
Mm,
the similarity between PvP and PvE is, um, essentially in both aspects you're joining together with a group of people for a common goal,
mm, yes.
and you sort of band together and you have banter and, um, I mean, in the ideal situation, sometimes you come across few rotten eggs. Uh, with all community.
Mm,
That's just a reality. But
yeah.
generally, the majority of people they're gonna band together and, sort of become ad hoc friends if they haven't ever met the other
Yeah.
person before. Um,
Yeah.
which is also why I really like realistic shooters, because when you join a squad and you're in a squad where that how you use their microphones. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
you actually get a really great player experience, for an hour with people that you're probably never gonna run into again, unless
Unless you
you
make a
keep.
point of doing so.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that with the that sort of come on, brain. uh, you can cut that. I think with the that sort of side, it sort of still has a large sort of cooperative feeling to it. Like the objective is just dealing with other players versus dealing with whatever the PvE objective might be. So any game that's got like your raids and your gear builds and things like that, um such as your like Division, Warframe, World of Warcraft, those sort of ones, their PvE tends to be it tends to be a little bit different in terms of sometimes the difficulty the difficulty for some of those is just getting the number of people that you need to do the thing together. And then it sort of becomes it's got a real risk of sort of becoming a like you need to respect everybody's time, if that makes sense. Like World of Warcraft, like you need, if you get 25 people together at the same place at the same time, okay, we got everyone together. It would really suck if we didn't achieve anything out of this. And then that sort of puts a little bit of social pressure on people as well, because then it's like, okay, so you've really got to try and pull your weight, right? But because there's 25 people, an individual's effect on the outcome is less. It's like a, you know, it's like a 6v6 shooter means you need to be you collectively need to be better to get better results. Whereas the more players you have, the less your individual impact matters. And it can get really hard to balance that. And then you get the raids and things like that, where you sort of people start getting a bit snippy with each other because they go, oh well, I'm doing all the hard work. You know, and then that becomes beyond the actual raid time. You also need to learn how to execute better. So you might join a raid, and you know, you might turn up for raid night and have a red hot crack, left click the buttons or sort of jazz. But then you might have other people in your raid group who, in addition to that, when they're not on the actual raid time, they might be looking up tips, strategies, new builds, like things like that. And it's when you get that sort of mismatch of perceived effort, where, you know, you start sort of, it's like the social things, like, is the whole team pulling their weight together? And then some teams have to actually are smart enough to sit down and ask, does that matter?
Yeah,
As well.
it's interesting in the fact that it mainly just happens in games where you can't just drop in, drop out.
Mm,
Um, so you do have to have a level of standard there
yeah.
to achieve the outcome that you're wanting to achieve. Um,
Yeah. And it's like that that weird thing of, like, you know, you have to respect each other's time, and it's like if other people are putting time in beyond what was immediately required, then that sort of starts feeding back weirdly, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like, oh well, you know, this guy, everyone puts in the 4 hours for the raid or whatever, but this guy over here is doing an extra 6 outside. And then, you know, are they, as long as they're okay with that, that's fine. But if they want to be a part of a community that has other people like that, then it is, like we say, it's worth taking the time to try to find or make that for yourself.
yeah, you need you set a standard for your community you have,
Mm,
and then if people go above and beyond, fantastic. But they have to understand that that's not the requirement to be a part of that particular community.
yeah.
Um,
So keeping on, I guess, with like the weirdnesses with some of the PvE side of things, we have speed running. Which is amazing. Like, why don't we take PvE and make it competitive? so, so
so
you go.
it could be quite. It's more. I would say time travels are more PvP because
Okay.
you're competing against another player to get a quicker time.
But
Um,
you're also competing
so
against your past self to improve.
ah,
Ah. Like, I think that's a big thing with, like, Trackmania, for example. Like, that is a hugely competitive racing game. But it does tend to be pretty chill about it, because most of the time, like, the only person who can exert control over your outcome is yourself. Like, you're either good at it and doing faster than the other people, or, you know, other people are faster than you. And a lot of that does come down to, like, your personal practice, if that makes sense. There's no game mechanics where you can affect another player's time. And so even though it's a competitive game, people tend to be like, hey, good job, you did a new personal best, and that sort of stuff for each other.
what do you
um
call I know you're versing yourself, so technically you're player versus player, even if the other player is yourself.
Yeah, that'll be a future mighty problem. Screw him. I'm gonna ruin his life. It's- um,
It gets even more interesting when they add in sort of the ghosts, right? Where you can actually
yes. Yeah.
see the other or your past self, and
Yeah.
you're trying to get faster than that ghost.
Yeah, and because you get a lot of those games that support that will also have like a public replay system. So Trackmania's got it. There was an indie game platformer called Dust Force, which had a very similar one, and like it's really funny too because some of those games had movement tech that was like randomly discovered. But because you can actually just view the runs of the top 10 or so on the leaderboard or something, it spreads along the community very quickly. So that's really exciting, if that makes sense, because like the whole community gets behind new techniques and new ways of approaching levels and things like that. And that's true of Trackmania as well.
See, the equivalent
Um,
of sort of just watching like a pro game for like Counter
yeah,
Strike. You get to
mm,
see, you know, the lineups or the cheeky spots they're using in
yeah,
a particular game, and then implement that in
yeah.
your own gameplay.
Yeah, and I think with those, like for a competitive shooter, such a thing, it can sometimes be a bit opaque. You know, you might say like, "Oh, why is this guy slowly walking around the corner?" You know, and it's not immediately obvious that the mechanic is okay. He's preserving his cone of fire or his first shot recoil multiplier or something along those lines. Whereas, you know, something like a racing game, you can just like, he turned left here. I'm going to turn left there. We did it.
Woo!
But there's other sort of ones that have got little time leaderboards that I got really sucked into. One of them was Bulletstorm. So Bulletstorm was a shooter, but their whole deal was like kill with skill. So if you just run around doing headshots, that's not creative enough. It might be you have to run around, shoot a guy in the crotch, and then kick him into a cactus or something along those lines. And the more convoluted those kills are, the more points you get, and you can chain them together. And there's all this sort of stuff for manipulating. It's very playgroundy sort of style, and they've got co-op as well. And it's all based off of like cumulative point scores. So there might be ones where you just spend time kicking a dude back and forth between each other, and then throwing him into a tornado or something ridiculous.
Think-
And so that and that one's got like score attack and point attack kind of style of games that like those things, especially when they have leaderboards that have got you can sort by friends. I am gone, man. Like, oh man. Like I started playing Monster Train recently. It's like it's a card. It's like a bit like a tower defense card battler, kind of like Slay the Spire. And that's got like at the end of it, it pops up with like your friends on the little scoreboard, and I was like, oh no, I can see myself getting stuck into this
The
just because
trigger.
of that. Yeah, yeah, that's it. Like it's like one of those things you see. Oh, competitive leaderboards. Oh no,
Uh,
goodbye several hours of my life.
as a special mention of, I don't think we've sort of crossed this concept for a PvE community that doesn't have a common goal, which are your
Mm,
like your role playing communities,
mm.
where you're actually just doing your own thing, sort of stumbling into other people. So if we go into GTA um,
Oh
5M,
yeah.
no one's there having a common goal per se. You could argue that, oh, I'm being a cop and I'm hanging out with another cop, and our common goal is to give out speeding tickets
Mm.
and do cop things. Um,
Do cop. I would hope
yeah.
that a cop would do cop stuff.
But yeah, you have that where a community comes together to sort of just
Mm,
do the same thing,
mm,
even if
mm.
they're doing slightly different roles
Yeah,
to complete that entire experience.
and that's an interesting one too, because there's an even more extreme version of that, which is flight simulators. So there are people who spend a lot of money to basically set their setup so they're there for like a flight simulator. You know, okay, I'm good to fly, all this sort of stuff. But then they can join either like discords or mod groups or something like that where someone else is doing air traffic control. Like for all these other people playing this flight simulator for fun in their spare time. Like
Really,
I'm
like
impressed.
those sort of people are just there to improve the experience.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
like just coming into London Airport and some dude's yelling air lingo at you, and you're like, I
Yeah.
have no idea what this means.
Yep. Yep. It's
I'm a
fine. I'll do it. I'll
casual
do it.
player.
I promise. I'm not gonna actively crash. But but that's like about a lot of the like gaming communities and stuff, which is really nice, is where people can just unashamed sorry, I'm dying. Where can unashamedly love something to that degree that they put that amount of effort in. You know, like I am it's there's a certain kind of inspiration to that, I've got to say.
Yeah,
um
it's like it's if we go back to what I was mentioning earlier about people screaming medic in
yeah,
like How Let Loose.
exactly.
They're just the exact same similarity between a PvE game and a PvP game. There's just people
Mm.
there who are uh, just being a little bit extra to make the whole experience better for everyone involved.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
that's
yeah,
great. I have to say.
and they're the things that
Uh,
you remember.
yeah, you remember those sort of moments a lot more than like I got an upgrade. My +2 gun sword went to +4, and I
Yeah,
skipped +3 stuff.
we
You know?
completed we completed the raid.
Yeah, yeah. Like you don't necessarily be like, oh yeah, no biggie, I completed the raid. It's like we completed the raid, and we had to deal with all of this stuff in addition to the mechanics to make it happen.
And some random dude screaming Leroy Jenkins in
Yeah,
the
yeah, exactly. Like where failure is definitely worth a lot more than the success in that instance, you know?
yeah.
Um, so now the other thing that I've seen with regards to sort of like the competitive sort of side for PvE, it's a little bit of a weird one, but there is a kind of there is in some cases there's a kind of like difficulty fetishism that can come from some games, and it's
What a
usually
word.
expressed. I know, right? Dear diary. Um, but it's usually expressed in like mods or things like that. Like someone will go, "Oh, you know, I beat this game on expert, so I made a mod to make it harder." And I think what a lot of those, I'm yet to see one that genuinely improves the experience without railroading you into a specific playstyle. Darkest Dungeon was had a little bit of this. XCOM had it in some cases. Now, to be fair, it's all mods, you know. And if people want to have a crack at improving the difficulty, I am all for that. But I don't necessarily believe that either like cranking up numbers, like oh these enemies just do X% more damage, is a great expression of improving difficulty. I think giving you more things to manage is probably the better way to go about it. Because, for example, Dark Souls, the difference between Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, they changed how many arrows you could carry. So instead of carrying like one stack of 100, you had to carry like, you know, 10 stacks of 10 or something like that. Now, I think my brother played it and he didn't change his strat at all. Like, he still just sat way back and just plinked away with the arrows. And, you know, some might argue that is an exceptionally boring way to play Dark Souls. And that's true. But at the end, you kill the boss, you get the dopamine. Am I right?
You cheese the game.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of where I think difficulty is. It's an interesting one, um, on how it affects like the PvE PvP discussion, because the difficulty is different. So like a PvE game, difficulty can be tweaked in all sorts of ways. You can either have enemies that just straight up are tougher than you. You have enemies who might have like because of AI, they'll have like perfect awareness. Like you might be able to look at a picture on a screen and you can go, oh, I can see a guy there. But sometimes you might not see that. You might be looking at a different part of the interface and you'll miss the guy. Whereas an AI will be like, I see man, I shoot man, you know? Um, and so that's kind of what I think that PvP offers over PvE, is that you have genuine fair difficulty. You're only playing against in I should put the caveat there that you're playing a game that is balanced in good faith and not like a pay to win monstrosity. um, but like you have games which are made for PvP, and I would rather play a game that is balanced in fairness for that. There is a weird crossover with some RPG games that have a lot of like gear is a lot of the focus. So like this is like your World of Warcrafts, your Division, your Borderlands. In when those ones do have PvP, it matters more so on your gear than it does your execution. And so the battle sort of changes. You know, it's not you didn't win because you played better in the moment. You won because 2 weeks ago you equipped the really sick helmet. You know,
The
um,
overpowered meta helmet.
yeah, you know, and that sort of affects their metas weirdly as well. Sort of thing. So I think that's where I think that sort of crosses over between like the difficulty fetishism. Like if you really like having difficulty in video games, you need to get into PvP games because that's where it is the most fair. Because otherwise, if you're doing a lot of PvE stuff, you just kind of end up cheesing the game, like you said. Either for a speed run or just to get through a difficulty spike or something along those lines. Like your solution isn't always you're not trying to overcome like quote unquote a fair challenge unless which to be fair which doesn't matter to me if that makes sense. Like I don't mind having a crack at something, but I don't really go for uh like it feels like complete BS, like, oh,
Yeah.
this enemy, I can't engage him, he will kill me in 2 hits and I can't take 2 hits, and I do like 1/250th of his health when I hit him with my strongest attack. That's not necessarily my idea of a fun challenge.
Yeah.
But like I think the Soul series really does show that there are people who definitely go for that.
Yeah, that's a great way to sort of sum it up. When you're finding your tribe, it doesn't.
Mm,
It can be you could be into PvE games or PvP. Not there's not going to be a one aspect of a community that's going to fit everyone's cup of
mm.
tea, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's worth just sitting down and knowing exactly what you want to go for, and going in for it. Like it's because otherwise, if you just kind of drift through games, you kind of might end up wrapped up with people for a while that you don't often. How do I put it? As you sort of spend time with people, and over time, you sort of create these expectations of them, but you never expressly discuss those expectations. And then that's when communities start to fall apart, is when enough of those have built up in enough different people that you didn't discuss it, but suddenly I'm disappointed in you for not reaching a standard that we didn't realize existed.
Yeah, I feel that's a great topic that we could probably go into next week, which is
Okay.
how these communities sort of turn against each other
Yep.
and become toxic.
Hmm.
So I guess yeah, we'll wrap up. This
Maybe
has
that'll be
been
next week's show then.
yeah, this has been the PVE and PvP difference. Um, I've been Morg, and we joined by Mighty, and we will see you next week on the community meta. And in the interim, I hope you have a great time finding your tribe.
Hey, legends! Thanks for watching the show. If you want to make sure that you're across all of the Game On Aus content here on YouTube, make sure you click the subscribe button. Likes and comments also help us out in the long run. Cheers. I'll see you on the next one.